Hello and welcome back to the Ballymaloe Festival of Food podcast. This episode explores the theme of Middle Eastern cuisine and the complexities behind that label through a live panel discussion recorded at the Grainstore during the 2025 festival. In this conversation, you'll hear from Anna Patrowicz, a sommelier with a deep knowledge of Palestinian wines, Noor Murad, a Bahraini chef and cookbook author known for her work with Ottolenghi, Fadi Kattan, a chef and a leading voice in modern Palestinian cuisine, and Russ Parsons, longtime food writer and former food editor in the LA Times, who leads the discussion. Together they explore food, identity, culture, and the importance of understanding where our food comes from. Now, this is exactly the type of thoughtful, engaging conversation that you can expect at the Ballymaloe Festival of Food, which is held each year in Ballymaloe, East Cork, Ireland. And the 2026 festival will take place from May 15th to the 17th this year. Tickets are available now at the BallyMaloeFestivalofFood.com. For now, enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to Ottolenghi Grainstore for this discussion on Middle Eastern cuisine. My name is Russ Parsons. For the last 5 years, I've been writing a monthly column for the Irish Times, and before that, 30 years food editor at the LA Times. To introduce the topic, I wanted to talk a little bit. The term, for me, the term Middle Eastern cuisine has always been one of those kind of vague, vague to the point of meaninglessness. Depending on the person who's using it, it could be anything from, Morocco to Turkey. It's such a disparate area, both in terms of geography and in terms of culture. But given the current events today, I think it's all the more important that we try and reach some kind of understanding of what's going on. And of course, this is a food festival, so the best way for us to understand it, from our point of view, is to be talking about food for the next hour or so. Our experts for the discussion are Fadi Kattan, one of the founders of modern Palestinian cooking, Noor Murad, who's a Bahraini chef and cookbook writer, working most recently with Ottolenghi, the great diaspora. And Anna Patrowicz, who is a sommelier and an expert on Palestinian wines. Fadi Kattan comes from one of the oldest Christian families in Bethlehem, dating back to at least 1738. He was exposed to a wide range of cuisines early in life due to his family's travels in the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. He worked as a chef in Bethlehem, founding Fada, which was one of the first modern Palestinian restaurants. In 2022, he co-founded a restaurant called Cookbook in London, combining British produce with Palestinian flavors. And his first cookbook, Bethlehem, was published in 2024. He's also a partner in Louv's restaurant in Toronto. Noor comes from Bahrain. Fascinating mixing pot of Arabic, Iranian, and Indian flavors, all of which probably made it inevitable that she would end up cooking for Ottolenghi. She's branched out on her own now, and her new cookbook, Lugma, is gorgeous, and it's in the shelves now. And if you weren't around earlier for the fascinating discussion, Anna led on the wines of Palestine. Anna is a sommelier at Cuisine, and she's worked at some of the UK's finest restaurants. So to start things off, first of all, I wanted to ask Fadi, given the constant state of tragedy in Palestine, it's in the news daily. When was the last time you were there, and what can you give us what was your appraisal of the situation?
In Bethlehem's not as bad as Gaza right now, but we are under threat. There's 23 Israeli settlements on my lands as in Bethlehem lands. We can't leave in and out the country without the decision of an Israeli soldier. What is my appraisal? My appraisal is silence in the world and it's silence in our industry. You mentioned Middle Eastern food. I liked how diplomatic you were about it. I don't use this word. I refuse to use this word. I am Palestinian. I shouldn't be ashamed of being Palestinian. I shouldn't make my food acceptable to you guys. It's my food. And if you like it, you like it. If you like that I'm Palestinian, you're welcome to come to my restaurant. But I can't become something else. It's a bit like asking the Irish to become British. You are Irish. So for me,
Careful now.
well, I am saying it to provoke people. How is the situation? Bethlehem is a city that has 35,000. 4,000 people have left in the last 2 years. By the time the world wakes up, there will be no Palestinians left. And that is the problem. The problem is we're allowing Israel, and by the way, just a note about all Israelis, and I'm not being anti-Semitic or whatever. Israel is a country where all Israelis serve in the army, except the ones who refuse, and the ones who refuse are very few. All the others that come to Ireland, to London, to New York, and give you the idea of, oh, we're a cool chef, have served for 3 years as men or 2 years as women in an army where they carry guns and raid my houses. So I don't know if you've watched Mo Amer, that comedian on Netflix, who's just released his 2nd season. And there's a fantastic character in this one of the cool Israeli chef in the US that cooks Palestinian stolen food and claims it's Middle Eastern, and claims it's Mediterranean, and claims it's Levantine. So I think it's time the world wakes up, says killing 50,000 people is not okay. I'm not going to have your damn hummus in your restaurant in London, Paris, or wherever, as long as you go on supporting killing people. Because I think that's our obligation as human beings. It's not being anti this or that. Would you be okay if we reverse the roles? If it was us Palestinians massacring Israel, would that be okay? No, it wouldn't be okay. The world would be in upheaval. You'd have governments taking sanctions against us. There's been no sanctions against Israel. The reason 1738 is because the church records were burned in 1738. But I can trace my family back most probably 2,000 years. Why should I accept the idea that God was a real estate agent and wrote off my land to a people? Would you accept this here? Should we get rid of everybody who's come to... He moved to Ireland. Should we throw him out because he's not Celtic originally? So why is that okay for Israelis to apply this on us? And that's really the big challenge of... I was chatting earlier with our friends from Canada. Should we throw them out because the indigenous communities are the real owners of the land? No, but should we disregard the fact that there has been an injustice and that indigenous communities have the right to what they were dispossessed of? I'll finish on one thing, and I warned you, I speak a lot. So you have to shut me up. My family are not refugees. We are based in Bethlehem, historically been in Bethlehem, traveled a bit all over the world, my grandparents, but we had land in Palestine. And in 1948, when Israel was created, our land was confiscated. I'll give you one example. We had land in Jaffa that had oranges on it. 48, my grandfather gets a letter saying, your land's gone, we've given it to the Israelis. I mean, the Israelis took it, not given. Why should I accept that? Why should I accept that somebody steals my land, gives it to somebody else, who goes on? We were exporting oranges. That person who's today on my land goes on selling my oranges for 77 years. Would you accept this? If I came to your flat now and threw you out and sit in it with the guard dog come up to me and be like, oh, it's okay, it's a historic prize, you can keep the land. No, they'd throw me out, most probably lock me up. Why is the world not taking that position with Palestine? Is it because of the historic guilt? And that's where I do need to make one point, and I urge you all to make that point. If you are pro-Palestinian, make a difference between country, which is Israel, which is a colonial country, and people's faith. What's happening in Palestine has nothing to do with religion. It's not Jews, Muslims, Christians, Samaritans. It is a country that was built on somebody else's land that has dispossessed people. Simple as that. Yes, they steal my food also.
Indian food. Food is an intrinsic and it's a bedrock piece of culture. So, what is your responsibility as a Palestinian when you're interpreting that food? How do you draw those lines between this is my interpretation of this, but also the necessity of you have kind of a responsibility to keep the culture alive.
Oh, we all have, but all cultures have. I think if you cook from your own culture, we all have this responsibility to preserve what our culture gave, because there are foundations, and our foundations are our culture. In the case of Palestinian food, it's more having to preserve it in the face of erasure. And that's where, for me, food appropriation is it's quite disgusting, because you'll have these chefs that are celebrating local, sustainable food, but then they're cooking my food claiming it's Israeli. And it's like, but wait, how can you be at peace with the idea that you're championing local farmers, championing sustainable food, but then stealing somebody else's food? And I don't mean that others can't cook Palestinian food. Just acknowledge it's Palestinian. Cook hummus, but acknowledge it's Palestinian. Cook falafel, acknowledge it's Palestinian. Cook, use Palestinian wines and acknowledge they're Palestinian. We're the first people to have planted grapes in the world. Just that part of acknowledgement, and even in our diversity, because you will get a counter argument, which is, and which I get all the time, of, oh, but I am originally Jewish from Syria and I'm allowed to call it Israeli. And it's like, no, you are Syrian. Even if you've in 48 moved to Israel, you're still Syrian. That dish you're cooking is still Syrian. So we do have a responsibility. I have a responsibility, I think, like many others. And that's why I call it modern Palestinian cuisine interpreted by me, because you get 100 chefs and you ask them to do modern Palestinian cuisine, there'll be 100 different ways to interpret it. But if I'm not acknowledging that it comes from the origin, the terroir, the transmission of knowledge that is Palestinian, I wouldn't be honest. So I cooked yesterday night here with produce that were 90% of them were Irish, and 80% of the products actually came from the property here. Does it make it not Palestinian food? No, it is Palestinian food. The flavors were Palestinian. Some of the spices came from Palestine. Olive oil came from Palestine, but it's cooking techniques that give the identity of food. It doesn't need to be sourced in Palestine. I don't think you should be all importing Palestinian lamb. We don't have much lamb. I want to keep the lamb.
Or you come at it from a very different point of view, because where you come from is a real blending of a mixing bowl of different cultures and of different flavors.
I mean, I agree with all of Fadi's points, and especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine. It's cooking Palestinian food is so necessary, because it's resistance, and it continues those stories, which are extremely important. And I think, but for me, like Bahrain, and I think when I moved to London, I had a very different experience. I just saw a lack of representation on my part of the Arab world. And the Middle East, I say, and I'll just say it broadly, I think it should be its own continent, really, because it is so rich and diverse in history, in language, in culture, in dialects. We all speak Arabic, but we all speak Arabic differently. And I always felt like my little tiny island, which is Bahrain, it's so small. It's only 50 miles long from top to bottom, so you could do an ultra marathon easy. And it's in the Persian Gulf, but that in itself is problematic, you know. So is it Arabian Gulf? Is it Persian Gulf? Like, there's so much politics involved. But like when you look at Bahrain, I say, like, because it's such a tiny island, it can't really form its own identity. So it kind of took from all the surrounding countries, because historically it was a very important center of trade. It was an important seaport that people would stop at. So we have like Portuguese influence, we have Indian influence, it used to be under Persia, so it was a huge Iranian influence. And then, of course, there's the Arabic influence, um, mostly from like the more Bedouin Arabs, just like think meat cooked underground kind of thing. And so that all kind of comes together to form like this one really unique, punchy cuisine that is Bahraini food. And so, with my book Lugma that came out just a couple of months ago, I've been talking about it, and I have people being like, people in the audience are like, "Oh, that sounds so similar to like Indian food, or that sounds so similar to something we do in Iran or Iraq or whatever." And for me, I'm always like, wow, it's food moves. There's so much movement, and it's constantly evolving and it's constantly changing. And somehow through that movement, Bahrain established its own identity. But then, we have like Bahraini dal. But dal is Indian. But Bahraini dal, we add a black lime and loads of herbs and potatoes. And so for me, I'm always like, well, who does this belong to then? Like, if this is something my grandparents ate and their grandparents ate, yani, we're just like a mixture of everything. But at the same time, if somebody were to take, at the moment, Black Limes are having their moment, and perhaps I contributed to that through my work at Ottolenghi. Maybe people don't know; they think it's Ottolenghi, but while I was working there, I kind of pushed this ingredient because I was like, "Why are you not using black limes?" You use the Persian. They're the same thing as like the light limes, and there's the dark limes. They're Persian limes, and they're used in Iraq. They're used throughout the Gulf. While I was working at Ottolenghi, they were using the lighter color, and I was like, "Oh, just use the dark black one." And he was like, "Why?" I was like, "Because they're more dramatic, and chefs love drama." Then they just kind of had a moment. That's the power of like someone like Ottolenghi who can kind of reinforce that. But for me, I know deep down, I'm like, that was me. That was the little Bahraini girl in the background. But I just like Fadi says, I really wish people wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm gonna make my celeriac skewers with black lime, this Middle Eastern ingredient." I really wish people would say like, this is lumi. This is like dried limes from the Gulf, from Iraq, from Iran. This is something that they use in their cooking, and I wish people would credit the culture, because I'm like, oh, Bahrain is so small. We can't give that much, but at least we can give that. And that's kind of how I feel about it, about food. So yes, I think there's so much movement. There's so much shared things between cultures. But I also think it's super important to credit like the inspiration or where it came from. I always say, like, especially to other chefs that like love cooking Arabic food, for example, I always say to them, okay, cook the dish traditionally as it should be. So if you're gonna make like a biryani, make a biryani as it should be. And then if you want to add your twist, add your twist, because then you keep the soul of the dish. We call it like the nefes, like that essence of something. You can't lose it because you know what it should be. So when you play, then you're not really taking away too much. And that's how I feel about food.
Well, in working for Ottolenghi as you did, I mean that kind of stands you in good stead. But are there lines that shouldn't be crossed?
In food, yes, I do think there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. I think especially when it comes to Palestinian food, as Fadi says, and especially like it's almost like writing out a whole culture, and writing out a whole people, and that's the line that I think should definitely needs to not be crossed. And also like I think in general as well, like I mean, maybe like Rami sitting in the audience, maybe she'll have some things to say, but like even like the word curry or something like that, the way that has totally been massacred in the UK, I think in general. But I think social media is so detrimental on the one hand, but it's so powerful in the other, and people are claiming it back, and people are standing up and saying, actually, this is how it should be, and I really love that. I love that people are taking a stand for their cultures and for where they come from and what they know, because it is so nuanced, and it is like it's a very sensitive topic as well. But there it's really, I think it's really important to preserve culture, because especially in the newer generations, like cultures can become lost and they can become faded. I definitely think the West kind of moves its way to the East. And you see like even in language, like the Gen Zs, a lot of them don't speak Arabic. They're all speaking English. And they're eating McDonald's and Burger King when I'm like, you should be home having machbous, which is like Bahrain's national dish. So it's so important that's why I think books are so important, because you're documenting it and you're putting it down and you're writing it so that one day maybe somebody will be like, I want a taste of something. I don't know what it is, but maybe I can cook it and I'll remember.
Coming to this from the outside, this isn't the kind of cultural range of cuisines that you were raised with. How would you characterize it? Flavors? Is there a kind of a specific?
He goes again to use Middle Eastern.
I think
He's next to me and he's saying Middle Eastern. I will have to use physical violence against him.
I said of what is called Middle Eastern. I didn't say. I didn't.
I'm teasing you.
I think that for me, I stop actually going to the restaurants which I know that they're owned, for instance, by chefs who don't want to actually say where they're from, or who don't say where they're from and they appropriate other people's cuisine. I stop that. Yeah, I do my research. And I just refuse, because I think that as a person from the outside, I want to learn in honest way the cultural background and the spectrum of flavors, as you said, and the traditions. And I think it's very important for us to do our homework and make sure that we support the right people who are actually carrying that message, as you said, of origins of food, origins of flavors, who are transparent about why they cooking something, how they cooking something, and where is it coming from. Because like Fadi is always saying, yeah, cook Bahraini, like you said, cook Palestinian, cook any other cuisine, but don't put it to this mixed pot of nothing Middle Eastern, whatever,
Right.
where you're actually sitting in a restaurant and you don't know really where you are. And you're trying geographically place yourself and you're like, I'm actually not sure, because it's such a blend of everything. So I think it's very important for me, and that's how I'm trying to discover all the cultures, to actually understand the essence. And I think that applies to all countries and their traditional national cuisines. So it's very important, yeah.
And it seems like something gets lost when you think of it as this grand amorphous region. Things get blanded out. It becomes a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of this. It loses the essence of itself.
Also, can I just jump in? That we can also ask that questions. When you are in those places, ask the chef, okay, so Middle Eastern, like, where is this dish from? But it has to be from somewhere, and especially if somebody is saying, oh, it's just playing on traditional flavors.
Yeah.
Challenge them, because if they are challenged, maybe that is the change, because maybe that will also open their eyes to transparency and allows them actually to be like, actually, you know what, maybe it's time for me to.
That's a really good idea too, because I think
there's nothing wrong with that. I think that
What
this
you
is
had
like
said-
going to the roots, like
what you had said about Middle Eastern is that it's in so many cases it's a defensive move, because the politics of the entire region have been so complicated for so long. I mean, in Los Angeles in the 80s when the great Iranian exodus started, and everybody was Persian, they weren't Iranian, because it didn't have the connotation. So if you say, well, I'm Lebanese, well, there's a whole. So by challenging them, then not reacting, they don't get the reaction that
just
they
give
maybe
space.
they have.
Yeah.
They have the confidence to be more self-declarative.
I think what is very important is what Fadi always says. Food is political. Either we like it or not. So let's stop pretending that it's not. And stop playing in this gray zone of the, food is not political. Oh, yes. always been political, always been like that, and it will be like that. So let's just be transparent about it and not hide behind smoke mirrors. So I think that's what I would add to.
Political, we're at Ballymaloe, where they source their produce locally in their land. That is already a political stance. So it's not only about Israel, Palestine. It's not an exception. It's where you source your produce, where you throw your waste is political. Where you source your water is political. I was teasing the Canadians about they hog 1/5 of the world's water in Canada. That is political. So it's not just about Israel, Palestine, or I love that at breakfast this morning, full Irish breakfast. As I go, what is that going to be? So I do hate beans. When I was served a full Irish breakfast that didn't have beans, I was like, yes, I'm going to defend Irish breakfast all the time. Beans are a horror. But Noor gave us a fantastic dish called machbous. And she said the Bahraini national dish. If next to Noor there was an Emirati, they would say national Emirati dish. And if there was a Qatari, they would say national Qatari dish. They're cooked very differently.
Mhm.
And that's when I fight against the idea of Middle Eastern. In those three countries in the Gulf, you have the same dish that has more or less same name, more or less the same components. Flavor-wise, they're three different things, totally different things. They have one thing in common. If you are invited into a home, they won't let you go because you use ghee with it. They won't let you out except if you have ghee dripping out of your hand. But it is like the most generous communal dish, and they're different. So
Bahraini one's the best.
also have Qatari and Emirati friends. I have
La
to
la
say,
la la.
It's later. I want to try it, please.
Everyone knows Bahrain has the best food, okay? In the Gulf.
that's a good example of not putting a massive label on it, because Bahrain, as you were saying, is a mixing pot of all these influences. It's the same for most. I remember my first time in Kuwait. I was sitting in this traditional market, traditional restaurant, and I asked the guy for the menu, and he looks at me like, "What do you mean menu? I am gonna get you food." And then he starts getting the food, and I think somebody tells him in the ear that I'm a chef. So I end up having to eat everything the guy is cooking.
Yeah.
And some of it looked familiar, reminded me of Indian food. Some of it reminded me of Persian food. Some of it reminded me of Palestinian food. But none was a copy of that because of that mixture. Does it make it not Kuwaiti food? No, it is Kuwaiti food. But it has, we as in Palestine, if you look at the world map, we were on the trade route, we were on the coffee route, on the Silk Route, we were on every trading route possible across in that region of the world. Cultures came in. Yesterday on my menu, there was a dish that comes from the Armenian tradition, because the Armenians were massacred by the Ottomans, ended up in Jerusalem, and they were there before because of the religious significance of Jerusalem, and they came in with their own recipes. 200 years later, 300 years later, that becomes part of a common flavor that we all identify as local. But I will still say it's Armenian food. I can't make it Palestinian. There's another controversy in our part of the world, and it's this piece of dough that has a bit of minced meat and tahini on top. And it's called, or tahini or tomatoes, already and it's called lahmu ajun by the Turks. It's called sfiha by the Arab speakers, and it's called Armenian sfiha. The story is that it's Armenian butchers in Aleppo and Syria who invented that. Tell this to a Turk, they won't be happy. Tell this to a Palestinian from Jaffa, they won't be happy. So at the same time, we have to admit that within the nature of the land, there are commonalities, and there will be commonalities. So between Lebanese, Syrian, Jordanian, Palestinian, more or less, are there any Egyptians? No. No, Egyptians have a very different. Paul cooked a stew called molokhia that is cooked with mallow, jute mallow, from Egypt up to the north of Syria. Everyone will do it differently. Then in North Africa, basically in Tunisia, molokhia is cooked totally differently. They dry the leaves, make a powder with it, and make it into a warm stew that has quite a bit of oil. So it's a very different way of doing it. And then the 70s, the Japanese found out about molokhia, liked it, and now you walk into a supermarket in Japan, you have molokhia, but it's used as a seaweed. So, so food does travel, and it's a bit the beauty of food to just acknowledge where it comes from. In the Arab world, we all acknowledge that this molokhia mallow, originally as a plant, is Egyptian. Even if we cook it, and it's very different. It grows in Palestine, but it is Egyptian. So we have to acknowledge those origins. She used a fantastic word, nafas.
Yeah.
I want nafas, which means breath, but it also means hospitality. It englobes this like desire of cooking. And I remember once asking a quite elderly Palestinian woman about food appropriation. I'm like, Khelto, which means aunt, Khelto, look at these Israelis, they're stealing our food. And she turns around, looks at me with this like cheeky smile. She's in my book. Her name's Nabil. She has a golden tooth.
No.
She smiles at me. She's like, yeah, they can steal our food, but they can't have the same nafas we have. And I think she's right.
Yeah, it's true.
If it's not part of your culture, it's not part of your passion, it's very difficult to replicate that emotion.
Is there, how would you describe Bahraini food? I mean, is there like a set of characteristics that's unifying, or is it because when you've got Persian, Indian, Arabic, those are
Yeah,
very, very disparate cuisine
yeah, it's a unique cuisine.
together.
Well, Bahraini food is very heavily spiced. We're not shy of our spices. So all the Indian spices that you have, we have for like every dish has its own khalta, يعني, its own mixture of baharat, of spices. I also hate that word in, baharats that people sell like jars of baharats. I'm like, what is that? If you see baharat spice mix and people think it's seven spice or Lebanese seven spice. Anyway, but anyway, that's the side thing. I don't like that. But so every single dish has its own like spice mix, and every dish is, there's always onion, ginger, garlic, green chili, like, so that is kind of like very similar to the Indian bases. But then Bahraini food, so many herbs. Like we're a desert, we can't grow that much stuff, but we can grow herbs. And so, and I'm talking like a big bunch of parsley, dill, coriander. These are the three main ones. We put them in the base of rice dishes, of saloon, like stews, yeah, kind of like curry kind of style. And then so you have very herbaceous, very spicy, and then also quite sour. Like we love our tamarind, we love our black limes. We'll put that in the base of things. And the main carb is rice, but rice is not native to the land. Like, Bahrain is a desert, but it was brought through trade. It was loved, and now Bahrainis won't sit down to lunch if there's not rice on the table. It's incomplete. We've got lasagna. You have rice on the side. Yani that's how we do it.
Yeah, Irish
And
potatoes.
yeah, rice with potatoes as well. We love a double carb. And so yeah, just think like big, grand, very generous, abundant food. Lots of slow cooked meats like mutton and things like that. And then a lot of street food, like we do all the grills and the charcoal and all that kind of stuff, but like we marinate in like ground black lime. We have like similar to samosas, but we call them sambusa. We stuff them with mash, mung beans, or with cheese and spicy potatoes and that kind of stuff. And then just like we have these places and they're all over the Gulf, and it's called Karaku chapati, and that's the name of the place, and it's literally this chapati, like Indian chapati, sometimes rolled, and you spread it with like salty cheese and put Lay's or like crisps in it as well if you want to be super naughty and roll it up. Great midnight snack with karak, which is like a masala chai. So you have all of these things and that kind of is Bahraini food. Like I can't really put it into one word, but just like very rustic, very comforting, very abundant and generous.
As a recipe writer, because with your new cookbook, you're not so much part of the restaurant world, but you're a recipe writer and a recipe developer. If you write a recipe for Bahraini food, for a Bahraini dish, and I cook it, will it taste Bahraini?
Yes, if you follow the recipe, you don't deviate too much, you know. Yeah, I would say it's Bahraini. I think you know, my book Lugma it is a lot of like traditional dishes, but it's also a lot of not traditional dishes because my mom is English. She moved to Bahrain 40 years ago. She met my dad. You know, she was from Northampton. She saw this like very hairy Arab man, and she just fell in love. And she moved to Bahrain, and so I had a very like mixed upbringing. And I put that into my food because it's who I am. I'm a child of two worlds. But yeah, if like the essence of Bahraini food will be in the dish. If I've made it a Bahraini dish, it will always be there. Because that's kind of how I wanted it to be. This food with no ego, but with lots of soul. So yeah, you're gonna have to try some. Yeah.
Sounds delicious.
Just to Palestinian food, because we're talking now. The whole emphasis of this has been separating out the strands that those horrible people call Middle Eastern.
He's getting there. He's getting there.
I'm getting it. I'm a slow learner though. How would you typify Palestinian cooking as opposed to anything else in that whole amorphous?
Did you see this? He was going to say, as opposed to Bahraini food, and start another Middle Eastern.
When I'm in the middle, please.
All of our foods represent our terroir. It does represent what grows or doesn't grow. The reason the Bahrainis have a lot of herbs, I just learned. I was listening to you fascinated because I realized I know nothing about Bahraini food, like literally nothing. It's you need to take me to Bahrain. But like they don't grow herbs. They don't grow vegetables. They grow herbs. We have a very fertile land, but we also have a bit of desert. So in our bit of desert, and the nomadic Palestinians will have the same techniques that nomadic Bahrainis would have, because you know what? Dairy in the desert, heat, it doesn't take a genius to dry yogurt to make it into what we call laban jamid, which could be called kishik somewhere else in the region. So there are techniques that are common to humanity. You sun dry whatever you grow in this. So in our Palestinian food, olive oil is very present. We have the oldest olives in the world. Ghee is very present, like you would find in certain Gulf countries.
Olive oil.
Yeah.
And ghee.
Yeah.
Olive oil because of the olive trees, but ghee because of the nomadic cattle keeping culture we have. And it varies across in the country. So the more north of Palestine you go, you'll have more olive oil and less ghee because there's less desert. And the more south you go, where we have more desert, you'll have less olive oil and more ghee. And that's normal as fats. Chili and dill, we don't use except in Gaza, because Gaza was a Roman port through which chili was coming from India, because chili is not originally Indian.
Portuguese.
I'm saying sorry. But the Indians are the ones who really flourished the use and planting of chili. So it would come back to Europe from our part of the world, and it would go through Gaza, and that's where in Gaza chili is very present. In my family, my mother doesn't eat chili at all. And my aunt, who's from Gaza, would not eat anything except with chili. The recipes are also regional. They reflect what is really there on the ground. We use a lot of sumac, which you would use, which the Persians use, which Canadian indigenous people use, because it happens to be a tree that's there. We all as human beings tasted it, realize it's tangy, It's it replaces that acidic taste, and so we all use it differently. We use a lot of lamb, but people are very mistaken. They think our food is very meat based, and it's not. It's very herb based, it's very vegetable based. We have a fantastic climate where we have very short seasons of different produce. So we have the best apricots in the world are Palestinian, but it's a 3 week season. Swiss chard is a 2 week season. We use hedge mustard, it's a 4 week season. So our cuisine really changes with the same techniques. So there's a beautiful word, two words, bilzet, in oil. And this bilzet is like a magic thing. It's basically oil, garlic, salt, and it can be any herb. So you have fasulia bilzet, which is beans in zait, and even like fasulia is a very large word, so it could actually be very different types of any green form bean, and they will change during seasons. Spinach, bilzet, okra, bilzet, and it goes on. And then we take that, add some tomatoes, and it becomes a stew. And then we take that, add some tomatoes, and if we have guests coming in, we'll put some meat. So it becomes a meat stew with the same herbs. But they're really repurposed for different usages. Our traditional dish, our like most traditional dish, is musakhan. And musakhan is a layer of stone-baked bread dunked in olive oil. Olive oil dripped on top. I dunk them and I get told off, but I dunk them like it. And then onions cooked with sumac and roasted chicken with sumac that goes on top. That's like to celebrate the olive oil season. Try getting a Palestinian to feed you musakhan in December. They won't like this. Do it because you're a foreigner, but they're like, that's not the right season. So it's a very seasonal cuisine, and it's a cuisine that's very alive. And I think that's the beauty of being able to cook in these environments. It was a nightmare for me to write my cookbook, where the first time I did the draft, I followed those seasons and I sent it to my publisher. And she called me up. She's like, "Why do I have 422 chapters that are 422 seasons for 70 recipes?" I was like, "Oh." She's like, "Okay, how about we stick to the 4 seasons? Not more than this now." But it is the beautiful way to, I make jam all year round, but I make jam, with
Different
everything
fruits.
that are right, and it's all year round. I was trying to, you have hawthorns that grow here.
Yes.
And I was like, "Come on, really? Can you get me out of the car? I want
Flowers.
like hawthorn is disappearing in Palestine because the Israelis are taking over our land. They're reducing the water access we have, etc. And here it's growing all around. And it's like, okay, that's going to be like loads of tons and tons of hawthorn jam. In Toronto, they had to take me off the public park because I was climbing sumac trees. Because that's the other thing is,
Yeah.
that should speak to the Irish a bit. We are also a people that still have a period of scarcity, and scarcity affects how we eat, affects how we cook, affects how we preserve things. And what helped people in Gaza for the first few weeks after the 7th of October was the food they had preserved, which today is not the case, because today it's 2 years of a man-made starvation. But the first few weeks, people had preserved food that was sun-dried. It didn't need a fridge because, Israel cut off the electricity, food, and water literally on the 8th of October. But people had a bit of food that sustained for a few weeks. Nothing sustains 2 years.
I want to thank everybody for coming and thank the panel. It has been a fascinating discussion. So, are there any questions at the we have just a couple minutes left before they forcibly evict us.
There's a question there. There's quite a few local vegetables grown in Bahrain. Bahrain's land used to be very fertile, has all these beautiful natural springs. Unfortunately, with like the boom in just industrialization and modernization of Bahrain, so many of those local farms kind of have just been built over. And now there's a huge movement for local growers and farmers to start selling their products. People are a lot more interested in food from the land. And even I was quite shocked because I didn't realize how much we can like local tomatoes, cucumbers, courgettes, aubergines, and these are all Bahraini food, broccoli, cauliflowers. So it's so amazing to see now. And also seafood, like Bahrain is an island, we're known for our seafood, and but a lot of it is dried. We use a lot of like dried prawns in our dishes. It's quite a acquired taste, but it's very strong. And then the imported food does come because, just like we have these big supermarkets, just similar to like, like a big Waitrose or something. So, but I just, the prices are insane, like berries and asparagus. So, like when I moved to the UK, I was just, oh my God, berries are so much cheaper here, even though everyone's like, "Wait." Yeah, there's a lot, just a mixture of things. There's, but there's a huge movement more to buy things like I think dried products and stuff are all kind of imported.
What else? Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.